And Michael will go ahead and introduce member member supervision and support. Go ahead and take it away, Michael.
Okay, just bear with me a second when I get this set up.
Okay.
All right. Is everybody seeing the presentation?
Loud and clear.
Okay. All right, good morning again, everyone. So the first topic we're going to cover today, as the title card says here, is AmeriCorps member supervision and support, or member management, if you prefer that term. It's kind of a broad topic. There's a lot of sort of subtopics, so probably won't do a deep dive in each one, but we'll make sure that you get the basic information that you need to get started. I would invite experienced program directors to provide any insights or tips or reminders during this presentation. If you want to put them in the chat or come off mute, raise your hand. As Beth mentioned a little earlier, at the commission, we are obviously steeped in the regulations and the rules of AmeriCorps. We can tell you a lot about compliance. We've collected a lot of best practices over the years, but we don't directly manage members. So, for some of those details, I think you all might have more insight than even we would have at the commission. So feel free to drop anything in the chat, as I said, or come off mute. So there are several topics to cover. Let me see if I'm not able to skip through for some reason. There we go. So here's the agenda for this presentation, about a dozen or so, baker's dozen maybe, topics. We're going to talk about member supervision requirements, preparing for a program year, member service agreements, member position descriptions, prohibited activities, timekeeping, teleservice, record keeping, MSY and slot conversions. We'll talk about members as team leaders, member evaluations, member exits, and a word about life after AmeriCorps. So as I said, kind of a lot to cover. I'll mention that each of these topics are covered in our program handbook, which is available on the website. So if you're looking for like step-by-step instructions, that's covered in more detail in the handbook. Okay, so let's get started. One of the sort of maybe frustrating dynamics of AmeriCorps, at least from my experience, and maybe some of you have experienced this as well, is that for certain topics, there are very specific instructions, almost pedantic instructions. If you think about like national service criminal history checks, it's very detailed. The timing has to be a certain way. The checks have to be done a very certain way. They all have to be adjudicated. They all have to be, you have to check the boxes in e-grants, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very detailed. With other aspects of the program, there is very little detail. And I would say that member supervision is one of those latter topics that don't really have a prescribed way, like you have to manage members this way. There's just sort of a broad sort of requirement, and then you have to sort of shape a policy within that regulation. So this is what
Hello.
hello.
How you doing? Yes,
Hi,
please.
could you please
Yeah,
mute
there's
if
no more
you're
mailbox. Leslie changed that, so
someone mute
Dinner is
that
91.
speaker?
okay. Bye bye.
Okay. So the first bullet here is what it says in the terms and conditions, that all programs must provide members with adequate supervision by qualified supervisors consistent with the approved program design. So already you can see that there's some room for interpretation there, right? Like how do you define adequate supervision, or how do you define a qualified supervisor? And how do you assess whether that supervision is quote unquote consistent with the program design? There's some room for ambiguity there and for disagreement. So that's why you'll need to put some thought into your policies and develop procedures that work for your agency. So notice that it doesn't say that you have to have eyes on your AmeriCorps members at all times. They don't have to always be within your vicinity. So that isn't the way that it has to be. You could make that your policy. There's nothing saying that you couldn't. That would certainly be adequate supervision. But also you shouldn't have members enrolled and then you don't hear from them for 6 months, right? So somewhere in between there is probably a good policy when it comes to supervision. But the second bullet point is kind of what I wanted to focus on, that programs, they need to establish procedures and policies that mainly they can verify member service hours, they can support their members, and they can prevent prohibited activities. That's really the most important aspect of the member service is their hours. That's how they're able to earn an education award and be successful in the program is by hitting a certain number of hours. So you need to be able to verify those hours. So your policies need to reflect that. And we've said it already at least a couple times in this training, and I'll say it again. It's worth repeating that AmeriCorps members are not employees. They have a very specific, unique classification. They're also not interns or fellows. They are AmeriCorps members. So it's not always going to be the case that your policies for employees or for interns necessarily are going to just be able to be kind of transferred over to AmeriCorps members. In some cases they might, but in others they might not. In any of these questions, I would invite you to contact the commission, your program administrator, or anyone at the commission, and we can certainly have a conversation about any of these policies. Yeah, I don't. One point I want to make clear during this training is that don't feel like you're bothering us. Like, this is what we're here for. We'd rather you contact us and have a conversation with us. We might not have the solution, but we can at least try to help talk through it. I think I saw a hand raised.
Yep, it was Colleen.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Colleen.
Do you have copies of example policies that you can share with us?
I think we probably do. Like, specific to supervision, I'm not sure. We certainly have policies in our files, and we can look through what we have. The issue, though, I mean, it may or may not be helpful is the issue, because depending on your agency's capacity and your own policies and practices, it may not transfer well. But
So I guess I'm thinking about a policy, Steve, that would, for an AmeriCorps member, that would outline the fact that they weren't an employee, that they fit within this special parameter. We could add language about what our supervision is or how we're recording their service hours, but just like kind of an overarching general policy that covers the pieces, the prohibitive act that they've been trained, that they'll be trained on the prohibitive activities, that type of thing, like a general overarching policy.
Michael, is that the
Sounds like the
site
member
agreement?
service agreement, right?
Or the service site agreement template?
Yeah, the member service agreement is probably, I think, probably most apt. There's also language in the terms and conditions that you could rely on. And then there's regulations on prohibited activities. And we can share all that. And again, that could be something that you talk through with your program administrator and see kind of what you need, and we can provide that. But yeah, we do have some of those resources, and I'll talk about a few of those topics later on.
I'm sorry, Michael. Colleen, I dropped the link to what we're referring to on our website in the chat.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on. So, as I said, there's some room for ambiguity. What needs to be included for all members, though? All members should receive an orientation. That's the third bullet here. At minimum, that needs to include training on prohibited activities, which we'll cover in this training session. But just as with anybody you bring on board at your agency, you should also go over all program policies and procedures that are relevant to the program. Go over their position description, talk about how they do their timekeeping, talk about teleservice policies and their benefits, et cetera. All the things related to their service. And we'll get into that a little bit more in later slides. So to prepare for a program year, you'll need to develop member service agreements. The good news is that we have templates for member service agreements. They're available on our website. They'll need to be adapted for your agency and your program, but they have all of the requirements in them. Along with the member service agreement is a position description. And that's part of the member service agreement. It's a separate document, but kind of all part of the same member service agreement. And as it says here, that the description should provide meaningful service activities, appropriate performance criteria. These documents, and I'll just, as a blanket statement, all of your program documents need to be available upon request by the commission or any other monitoring agency, which would include the Federal AmeriCorps Agency or the AmeriCorps OIG, Inspector General. OCFS's Audit and Quality Control Unit, they also conduct audits on our behalf. There's the payment integrity. I don't remember what the 2A Payment Integrity Act, but that comes from the federal agency. Sometimes they do reviews of expenditure reports, so they'll ask for documentation. So it's just important that all the files be maintained and that they're available upon request. You'll need to make sure that members have sufficient opportunities to complete their service hours. So one note on this, that is a little bit of a caveat in New York, at least, is that AmeriCorps members at the federal level, according to the federal agency, members have up to 12 months to serve to finish a term. However, in New York, you have distinct contract periods associated with each program year. So in order to be reimbursed for member costs beyond the end of a contract period, I'm sorry, you can't be reimbursed for member costs beyond a contract period. So a member could technically serve beyond that contract period, beyond the end of a contract period, but we won't be able to reimburse associated costs. So it's really in your best interest to find a term that a member can serve within that fixed contract period, and that's going to depend on your program start date and the terms of your contract. Then another note here about accounting for holidays and other time off requests, just again, to make sure that the members have enough time to serve. If they want to serve a full-time term, but they only have 6 months left in the program year, that's probably not realistic. So you may want to offer them a half-time term or a reduced half-time term, 900, 675 hours, something like that. Did I see another hand, Eric?
Yep, Eric Bell's got his hand up.
Okay. Go ahead, Eric.
I'm just being a voice of the people, Michael, here.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, because I'm often asked this question as one of the OGs of this thing. So I heard exactly what you said, and I understand exactly what you said. Maybe you can just say it in layman's terms, because I think you did it on one of our recent calls. So let's say, for an example, that at the end of November, our program has to stop. You know what I mean? For closeout purposes. So while you may enroll a member in, let's say, January, and once you put them into e-grants, technically you have 1 calendar year, but you have until pretty much the end of November to be able to bill for that member. Because correct. I know you guys have to go through your pretty much closeout process. Am I accurate in my response in that understanding?
Yep, absolutely. Yep, correct. And that's something to be aware of when you're enrolling a member, when you're considering whether or not they have enough time, because as Eric said, according to the AmeriCorps agency and in the e-grants, they're going to allow that member 12 months to serve, but there is also the end of your contract period to consider. So if they're enrolling in the 2025 program year, let's say you have a end date of 11/30, like Eric Bell mentioned, you want to make sure that they can finish whatever their minimum hours are from their enrollment start date through 11/30. Otherwise, you could let them serve beyond that, but the state won't be able to reimburse costs incurred outside of the contract period. So thank you, Eric, for let me clarify that a little bit. I'll move on to the next slide. As I already mentioned, all members must sign a member service agreement, and also either their supervisor or the program director, or someone in authority at your agency that is associated with the program should also sign the member service agreement on or before the member's start date. However, and this is an important distinction, the effective start date, the official start date for that member is going to be the date that is displayed in the AmeriCorps portal in eGrants, not the date on the MSA. If there's a discrepancy, we're going to take the date that the member was enrolled formally in the portal. So say they're enrolled in the portal on 10/1, but they didn't sign their service agreement till 10/5. 10/1 is going to be their official start date. And then reverse too is when it's more of an issue. If the member service agreement says 10/1, but eGrant says 10/5, 10/5 is their official start date. So they really shouldn't be reimbursed for costs, from 10/1 to 10/4, et cetera. So just be aware of that as well. These are all the elements of the member service agreement. So they must include the position description, as I've already mentioned, the number of service hours, the Siegel Education Award amount associated with their slot type. I went back. How do I reverse? Sorry about that. Also standards of conduct, the prohibited activities, the regulations related to non-duplication and non-displacement, fundraising, You should have your grievance procedures, et cetera, et cetera. I'm kind of going through these quickly because, as I mentioned, these are all in the template, but you'll just need to, adapt them for your specifics for your program. Same with the position description. You have a template available, but they need to include the member's specific title. You shouldn't use just AmeriCorps member or a generic title. It should be kind of specific to what they're doing. If they're in an environmental program and they're doing, education in the parks, it should be something like environmental education specialist or something along those lines. Something that's more descriptive than just saying AmeriCorps member. The position description should also identify the program name. You should confirm that members are not engaged in prohibited activities and also not supplanting or duplicating or displacing any members or any employees, excuse me. Also required are the qualifications for the position, the member eligibility requirements, and there should be a confirmation that the member agrees to complete the NSCHC. Again, that's built into the template. Okay, let's talk about prohibited activities. I think along with NSCHC, this is probably the other topic that is most it doesn't happen often, so I don't want it's not NSCHC happens to be probably the most frequent finding that we have, but any violations of prohibited activities are considered pretty severe. So you want to just make sure that you don't violate prohibited activities. They're going to be all listed here. If I've summarized them like this in the past, and I'll do it again. The basic rule is no politics, no religion, and no abortion services. Those are the prohibited activities, generally. But, as you read through these, it's attempting to influence legislation, organizing protests, petitions, boycotts, any kind of partisan activity, endorsing candidates, engaging in religious instruction, benefiting for-profit organizations, abortion services, and any other activities that AmeriCorps may deem prohibited. So important to not violate these. Obviously, it would put your grant in jeopardy, but it also jeopardizes the program broadly. I mean, especially I think in the current environment, it maybe goes without saying that after what happened all this last year, we don't want to give anyone a reason to question the effectiveness or the usefulness of AmeriCorps, or to accuse it of being a partisan program. I think it's almost impossible to avoid politics in our modern era, but like this was designed as an apolitical service program, and it's supposed to provide services to communities without the influence of politics. So one important point, though, is that your members, all of you, are welcome to be fully engaged citizens off of AmeriCorps time. This is just for while members are earning service hours or while a program staff member is being paid by the grant. So on non-AmeriCorps time, we have nothing to say about your activities, but it's just on AmeriCorps time that you shouldn't be participating in these things. Also on non-AmeriCorps time, members, program staff shouldn't wear AmeriCorps branded gear, just to avoid any confusion that, it was like a activity that was sponsored by the program. In addition to those listed here are also census activities. That's not something that comes up regularly. Censuses usually are every 10 years. It is also prohibited though, and then election or polling activities. And if you notice the last line here on the slide, this is just sort of a best practice. We'd recommend that you print out these prohibited activities, definitely train all your members, train all your staff members. Anybody associated with the program should be familiar with the prohibited activities, and as a best practice, maybe list and post the activities at your service sites. Okay, so moving on to timekeeping. This is another area where there are regulations. Timekeeping systems have to be compliant with the regulation linked here to CFR 200.302B. Generally speaking, for program staff, timekeeping must record actual time spent working on the grant, not budgeted time. So even if you budgeted, say, a position at 50%, that doesn't mean that each claim you just automatically claim 50% of that person's schedule. you need to be able to document the time that they spent working on AmeriCorps. So it's actual time versus budgeted time, and then you claim reimbursement for that time. So your timekeeping system must have some way of distinguishing between AmeriCorps time and non-AmeriCorps time. Let's see. Yeah, the time and attendance records are super important because that's really how we're going to determine member eligibility for their benefits, especially the Siegel Education Award. You have to hit the minimum required hours in order to be eligible for those benefits. Again, make sure you retain all these records. Your timesheets or time records for members should have distinct categories for service, training, fundraising, and should also provide lunch opportunity, especially if they're working or serving, I should say, a full day. I'll just read these last 2 points, Colleen, and then I'll let you get in here. So it also says here, no more than 20% of the aggregate of service hours may be spent in training. You may remember or recall that recently there was a rule change regarding the percentage of service hours that could be spent in training. However, AmeriCorps is supposed to issue a waiver, and they haven't done that yet. We have seen some indications from them that that is coming. So for now, it's still 20% for everyone if you don't have an approved waiver, and no one does yet. There's going to be certain criteria. If you meet, you can request, I think, to move that up to 50%. But you have to have a certain kind of program design, et cetera, and we're waiting on what that waiver is going to look like. And then also, a member may not spend more than 10% of a term engaged in fundraising. Colleen, why don't you go ahead?
No, my question was around the waiver because we had built in more than 20%.
Yeah, I saw last week, AmeriCorps seems to just kind of be getting back on their feet. The AmeriCorps agency, a lot of people just kind of have been trickling back in, and they're I think being retrained because their functions are going to be different than they were. But we were told somewhere, I don't know if any commission staff remember where that was. I think it was maybe in an agenda for an upcoming AmeriCorps call that they're going to discuss the waiver. So we're waiting on more information on that. All right, so teleservice, Eric covered this in his week 1 presentation, but just to review, teleservice is allowed, as it says here. Basically after the pandemic, AmeriCorps realized that there's no kind of putting the toothpaste back in the tube with teleservice or remote service or remote work, however you want to label that. So it is allowable, but it should be limited to certain situations. Really, AmeriCorps ideally would be direct service to communities. So there really shouldn't be a lot of teleservice, but it is possible that it fits in your program design. If you're going to employ teleservice, just like any other service, you need to have appropriate supervision and documentation. So this language here comes from AmeriCorps guidance. And again, there's some ambiguity here where, teleservice is appropriate only when the activity can be quote unquote meaningfully supervised, which, people can disagree on what that means. So you have to use some judgment and again, rely on us if you need to. We can talk through that. Make sure that you have a policy that makes sense. But essentially, just as I said, with regular service, you need to be able to verify the hours. So your policy needs to have these 5 bullets here at the bottom. It should incorporate written authorization of teleservice in advance, what the expectations of the communication requirements are. So our members going to be required to check in hourly, check in daily, etc. The policy should address a way to mitigate the increased risk of time and attendance abuse. Obviously, it goes without saying that you can't have a member just say they're serving, but they took a nap for 2 hours and then, try to claim 2 hours of service, right? There needs to be some way of verifying that these individuals are actually doing the service that they agreed to do. And that can look different from program to program. Then obviously verifying hours. And we discussed this also in week 1, but it's worth repeating that AmeriCorps has its own definition of remote service and of virtual service, and we kind of use these terms sort of casually, working remotely or having a virtual meeting, et cetera. But AmeriCorps defines remote service as an arrangement in which a member is not located within the commuting area of the geographic community where the service is to occur. And again, there's some ambiguity there. So like if you're a New York City program, for example, is Westchester in the commuting area? Maybe. I think you can make that argument. You could definitely make it easier than if you had someone from Buffalo who wanted to serve with your program, right? That's clearly remote. They're not in the commuting area. But there is still some ambiguity there. And virtual service refers to an organization that doesn't have a physical location. So if you're an online agency, so both remote service and virtual service as defined here are unallowable. But if there's any question, feel free to reach out. Also, just as a sort of a general rule, and this is kind of just me talking, like if there is ambiguity, I would err on the side of caution just to be safe, right? I mean, you don't want to think that, say, in the example, Westchester is included, and then have the OIG come in and say, no, that's not really included, and that's a finding in an audit, right? So if there's any kind of, if it's close, I would kind of err on the side of caution, just my general guidance. Other people may feel differently, and some people may be willing to take more risks, but just, you want to be careful. Okay, moving on to record keeping. I've already kind of talked about this. You need to maintain all of your records, including position descriptions, really just anything related to the program. The federal rule is that these records must be maintained for at least 3 years. Unless you're under an audit, then they need to be maintained for the duration of the audit. However, we would recommend that you maintain records for at least 7 years, because members have up to 7 years to use an education award. So it could be that, 5 years after a member leaves service, they go to use their education award. There could be some question related to their service, and maybe, it would be beneficial to be able to see their service records. So we would just recommend that you maintain those for 7 years. They may be stored electronically, and programs may use electronic signatures, and that's across the board. So e-signatures are acceptable. And then, it says here at minimum, be sure to maintain these documents. But again, I would just maintain every document that you have related to your program, member files and program files. Try to keep those organized. And then the requirements are the member files be stored in a secure space, kept confidential, made available if requested. And there's also a requirement to maintain the confidentiality of information regarding individual members. Program must obtain the prior written consent of all members before using their names, photographs, and other identifying information for publicity, promotional, or other purposes. I believe, I'd have to double check, but I believe we still have our publicity release form as part of the member service agreement. But I would just recommend that you ask your members to sign one, and then that would cover any release of photos, etc. If you share content with us and we put in the newsletter, they would have already signed their agreement that authorized the sharing of their, image or any other information related to their service term. All right, moving along. We talk about MSY and slot conversions. One member service year, or MSY, is equivalent to a full-time AmeriCorps position, the 1,700 service hour position. Each member position type has a different MSY value, and there's a table here that demonstrates the values. So when you are awarded an AmeriCorps grant, you're also awarded a certain number of MSY. During the program year, you have the ability to convert some of those MSY if need be to better manage your program. One thing to note, though, is that it's not exactly equivalent. So not in all cases anyway. So a half-time position is 0.5. Full-time is 1, half-time is 0.5, but you'll notice a quarter time is not 0.25. It's 0.2646. So you have to be careful with your math to make sure, so you couldn't make one full-time position into 4 quarter-time positions, right? You'd have to do 3 and then probably a minimum time or some other kind of configuration. So you want to be aware of that if you're going to be converting slots. But slot conversions, it's a program management tool that programs can use to reconfigure their makeup of their MSY. Or you can use it's a way to make use of an unfilled refill slot. When someone exits a term early, if it's before 15%, you can refill that slot. So to maximize your resources, this is one pool that you can use. So there's a few reasons why you may convert slots, responding to evolving recruitment trends, accommodating the needs and schedules of new members and or service sites. Maybe when you applied, you thought you're going to have a core of full-time 1,700 hours, but during your host site recruitment, you find that really what they need at a host site is someone who can serve a half-time term or some other kind of term. So then you might want to convert some slots. And then also if the program design or community needs change, that's another reason why you might want to be flexible with the position types that you offer. We would just ask that you have the authority or the ability to convert slots in e-grants without sign off from the commission. That's something that you have access to in e-grants, but we would ask that you inform us prior to making a conversion. We can kind of troubleshoot and just make sure that that conversion is not going to cause other issues. The slot conversions need to be budget neutral. So obviously you can't add funding to your program or increase the value of the education award amounts that were assigned to your program. So you just want to be careful of those things before you do a slot conversion. So I would just shoot your program administrator an email, say, hey, we're considering doing this. Like, do you see any issues with this? And just have a conversation with your program administrator, and they'll likely, depending on what you're requesting, if they approve, they would just sign off in an email, and you can go into eGrants and make those conversions. And the steps are listed here. It's relatively simple. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Michael, do we have a slot conversion form?
So we have, but in the past, like not everyone has used it. So there is a form that, and it's on our site. I don't require the form. So I just really would like Progress to check in with their program administrator and make sure that they're aware and that these conversions aren't happening like without our awareness. But I don't think we're requiring the form going forward.
Okay.
Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I know I'm kind of going too fast. I apologize. If anybody has questions, feel free to stop me. Put your question or comment in the chat. But moving on to the next subtopic. Oh, I see a question. Go ahead, Andrea.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So just generally with conversion, let's say that you're slotted for 10 members and like, do you have to have one person exit in eGrant before you could add another person? Just kind of wondering sequence-wise how that works in the system.
So you wouldn't be able to add a person. So if you're awarded 10, it's going to be 10 MSY, not necessarily 10 members. So that 10 MSY could be 10 full-time positions, but it could also be, say, 20 half-time positions. Both are 10 MSY. So when you're awarded that 10 MSY, let's say you applied for 10 full-time positions and received 10 MSY. You can enroll 10 full-time members and run your program that way, assuming they have enough time to serve and all of those other requirements are met. But you could also, during the year, say when you're recruiting, you're only able to fill 7 of those 10 slots, those 10 full-time slots. Now you have 3 MSY that you could convert to, say, 6 half-time positions, and then you could start recruiting for half-time positions at that point. So you can never increase the amount of MSY you're awarded through a slot conversion, but you can just basically change the type and you can reconfigure it, and you can make some smaller positions. Say you're getting towards the end of the year, maybe there's a project that you've thought of that would be a good project for the program to participate in, but you don't really need full-time members for it. It's only like a 2-3 month project. So you convert some full-time slots into minimum time slots, and then you try to fill those. So that's kind of the thinking behind slot conversions. So just again, I mean, I'm repeating it, but you can't increase your MSY amount. Any other questions on slot conversions? Okay, I'll move on to the next topic. Feel free to bring me back to that if anybody has any other questions. So we'll talk about members as team leaders. This is also sort of a specific term that AmeriCorps uses, a team leader. These individuals are still members, so they're not staff, and that's kind of the key thing to bear in mind. But you do have the ability to create positions where members provide sort of an additional layer of leadership and support for members. All the activities and prohibitions that apply to AmeriCorps members still apply to team leaders, so they have to, they're they're not going to receive a wage, right? They're still going to be receiving a living allowance. All of the other requirements still apply. They're not permitted to act in the staff capacity, as it says here. So signing member timesheets, evaluating members, disciplining members, doing enrollments in the portal, exits, managing the budget. That's not really their role. Their role is more for providing guidance, support, or training to members. They could maybe lead monthly meetings, lead service projects. They could kind of be a liaison between members and staff, or help develop community partnerships. So kind of taking on more of a leadership role, but they're still a member. They're not staff. And again, if you have questions, we can kind of talk through that as you're developing a position description for a team leader. But the main thing is, the key is to not have them acting as staff, but to be sort of a member, but in a bit of a higher position than the rest of the Corps. Go ahead, Beth. I see your hand up.
Thanks, Michael. I just want to make sure that the previous question was fully answered too, just in that I think she was asking, and I apologize not remembering who asked the question, but was asking about if members leave and how those, so if a member leaves service and that position becomes available to refill it, and you can change the slot. So if you don't have enough time, say it's a full-time position, the member leaves partway through the year, the position will become available again in the portal. You'll may not have time for another full-time member. So then you could convert that slot, bring on a part-time member in that slot. The education award is still available if the member left for cause and didn't access the ed award. If they left for compelling personal circumstances, it wouldn't become available because the education award will have been used. So, and maybe I misheard the question, but I just want to make sure that that kind of nuance was covered as well, because, members sometimes don't complete their terms of service, and if a member leaves doesn't mean that you completely lose access to that position.
Thanks, Beth. I think, and someone can correct me from the commission staff if this is wrong, but I'm pretty sure you have to use the other unfilled slots first, though. If you do, if a member does leave and that position becomes refillable, I think you have to fill the other unused slots first, right?
Yeah, I believe you are correct, Michael. Yep.
So, and with this situation or any kind of just abnormal situation, I would really advise you to get your program administrator involved. Just kind of, let them know, like, hey, we want to refill a slot. Like, do you have any guidance, et cetera, just before potentially making an administrative error in the system. Because it's always easier to, get it right on the front end than the back end. Those of you who've had programs for a while may have experience trying to do an administrative review from the AmeriCorps agency and changing things in the system. It's not always easy, and it's time consuming. So it's better to just try to address it correctly at the front end. So again, don't feel like you're bothering us or anything. Give us a call and we'll do our best to guide you through that.
Michael, Andrea in the chat asks, can team leaders receive different living allowances than other members?
They can, yeah. It still has to be within the parameters of the NOFO associated with your program, the notice of funding opportunity, or the guidelines in the RFP associated with your grant. So they can't exceed the maximum living allowance amounts, but they could receive a different living allowance amount than the rest of the members. But that should also, like with the other members, it should be consistent, right? So where it could be an issue is if like one team leader is getting this amount and then this team leader is getting a different amount, all the members are getting different amounts, and then it's potentially a issue of contention. So, I would just recommend being consistent and determining this prior to trying to fill those positions. Did I see another hand there?
Yeah, Eric Bell has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Eric.
Sorry about that. Hello. Michael, maybe you guys can speak to one of the issues I often hear, and I know this gets really complex. At least it is for us. So said member Eric Bell, we signed him up in October, he worked as a full-time member for 4 months or so. Life changed, like life always does change, and Eric's availability was not what it once was. So now Eric is still looking to serve, but he's looking to downgrade his level of his participation to perhaps you know TQ or a halftime member. How do we go about that? And I know that because I know that, so that's a different situation as opposed to a person leaving and then recycling the position. He's actually trying to downgrade the position. But as you know, Eric spent quite a bit of money on a budget line. And so, do you feel like speaking to that a little bit? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and just to the question, that is allowable under, it's something that, again, the commission staff would like to review to kind of just to see what the situation is. We are allowed on occasion to approve the conversion of a slot from a greater slot to a lesser slot, and even at times from a lesser slot to a greater slot. That's somewhat discouraged, though. With these situations, what I would recommend is just trying to do that as soon as possible, recognizing that as soon as possible, and working through that early in the member's term, because it's not allowable to convert a slot just at the end to make sure that a member gets a service education award, right? And so, like, the further along that member goes in their term, the more scrutiny that kind of conversion might receive, and therefore it's less likely to be approved, right? Like if you're on the last day of your service term and you want to go from a full time to a 3/4 time because you've served 1,300 hours and you haven't gotten to 1,700, that probably won't get approved, right? But if you're in the first quarter and the member is just realizing this is too much, I didn't sign up for the right term, then there is a process where you can convert that slot in eGrants. But again, I'm repeating myself a lot on this topic, but involve us just so that we can kind of troubleshoot and make sure that it's not going to cause an administrative issue. I don't know if any other commission staff want to add to that, but that's sort of the general principle there. Any other questions on that one, on team leaders or conversions or anything that I've covered so far? If not, I'll move on. We're getting towards the end, I think. Member
I
evaluations.
think
Yep.
I just want to jump in for 1 second and just say, some of these things, like some of it might feel like a fire hose of information, and you may not need to consider them until you need to consider them. So it's just a way of us letting you know that all of these options exist when and if the time comes, talk with your program administrator to figure it out.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to member evaluations. This is another requirement of your program. All members must receive an end-term evaluation. All full-time members also need to have a midterm evaluation, and you can provide midterm evaluations for less than full-time members. That's not a requirement, but it's good practice to give everyone sort of a midpoint assessment. But the end-term evaluation must address, at minimum as it states here, whether the member completed the required number of hours, satisfactorily completed assignments, and whether the member has met all their performance criteria. Without the evaluation, they're not going to be deemed as successfully completing their term, and that could jeopardize their education award when they go to use it. So make sure that all your members receive an exit evaluation, an end-term evaluation that addresses at least those three things, but you may want to adapt your evaluations to assess other aspects of the service program, and then maybe use that data when you're thinking about your program design for the following year, or when considering other aspects of your program. So you're definitely welcome to adapt your evaluation, but at the minimum it needs to address those 3 points there. And member exits. So this is sort of the formality in eGrants in the portal. Members need to be officially exited. They should be exited within 30 days of the end of their term. And again, this is going to certify to the trust that the member has completed their term, and that sort of notifies the trust that they're eligible to receive their education award. So when they go to use that in the future, if if they weren't properly exited, there could be a complication with them trying to use their education award. I'm not going to go through like all the step-by-step instructions in this presentation for how to exit a member, but I want to just point out, as with a lot of other topics that we've covered in this session, there's full instructions in the program handbook, which is available on our site. All right, so this will be the last topic. Just a quick word about life after AmeriCorps. In order to support your members, we would recommend that you encourage and train members to share their stories when they're finished. Train them on how to use their education award, or at least where to locate the information about how to use their education award, how to leverage their experience, inform them about joining alumni networks. There's AmeriCorps Alums, which is hosted by Service Year, formerly known as Service Year Alliance. And there's a link there that will be shared later. But also let them know about schools and employers of national service. I believe Eric covered that in week 1. But just as a reminder, there is a network of schools and a network of employers that have recognized the value of national service, and they provide incentives to former members of AmeriCorps. So members should be made aware of that. Encourage them to stay connected. So this is part of their term, is also learning how to use this term to their benefit after they're done, right? We want to, there have been some success stories about members who've been able to transition into a career, and that's obviously a desirable benefit of this program, is that individuals get experience, and maybe, as Beth talked about, they may learn that this isn't the right field for them, and that's also valuable, but they might learn that this is what they want their career to be, and therefore they could possibly leverage that into other opportunities. So yeah, as Beth mentioned, it's kind of a lot there. Happy to take some questions or comments on any of those topics. I think I'll stop sharing, actually, so I can see people. You can see a question in the chat. If a member reaches out and indicates that their education award is not the amount they anticipated getting based on their exit hours, is the best course of action to just have the member reach out to the AmeriCorps hotline? I guess it might depend on the situation. I mean, they should, I don't know if, Alina, if you want to expand on that. They should know what they're getting, unless they exit early and they get a prorated award, then they might not be aware of the exact amount, but they should at least be aware that their award is going to be prorated. So
Yeah, sorry,
yeah,
I was typing in the chat before I knew you were about to immediately say any questions, so I would have just unmuted.
No
So we had a member who was exited for their full award, which for that person was 300 hours of service work, and that's what full award meant for them in that case. And they did not receive the dollar amount that we were expecting them to get for that. And so I've only just been saying, like, you have to call the hotline, because I can't actually see anything with your ed award on my end, but I wasn't sure if there's any other sort of like official channels we should be reporting that to, or like elevating that to.
I would contact your commission program administrator to start, and we can kind of look into why that might be the case, that we're under one impression. It is. So one confusing element of this is on the AmeriCorps website, which is currently being revamped, so you wouldn't be able to see this now probably, but the way they list the education award amounts is a little confusing because they're by fiscal year. So they'll say like starting 10/1/24, but that's for the 2024 program year. But someone might confuse that with the calendar year and think that those numbers apply to them. So that's another reason why in the template we just kind of insert the correct amounts, because this has been an issue with programs in the past where they'll go on that page and they'll see, okay, these are for as of 10/1/24, these are the amounts, and my program starts in January or whatever. So they pick those amounts, but they don't actually apply because it's based on the fiscal year that program year was funded, which, yeah, it gets into the weeds a little bit, but that could be the cause of confusion. I don't know for sure, but again, it's just kind of like contact your program administrator, the commission. It's always the best place to start. We might not always have the answer or a solution, but we would at least probably be able to, point you in the right direction and find some resources that could be helpful. So.
Okay, thank you. And then you guys probably mentioned this last time, but I just wanted to confirm. So with Cooley's transition, if Cooley was our program person, should I still be emailing Cooley, or is there someone else I should be including on those?
You can email Cooley as of Wednesday. He's his last day,
Okay.
but we have we have discussed
Fired
program
off today.
assignments. Yeah, we're going to be putting out some information about program assignments. We're still waiting on some awards, so it's kind of where
Okay.
we're in this awkward place where not every program that we're anticipating being funded in this program year has been formally funded. So we're in this kind of weird in between place where we want to notify everyone, but we can't really notify everyone, and we can't really do contracting. So.
Got it.
But just for your information, we have discussed program assignments, so you will have a program administrator even after Cooley's exit, and we'll send that information out as soon as we can. But it's we kind of share information anyway, so just contact anybody who you have an email for, and if that person isn't your administrator or isn't able to address it, they'll forward it to someone else, and we'll make sure that we respond.
Okay, thank you. And then while I'm unmuted, I'll just ask my second question. We had a audit previously for our other program, which is previously called the FAFSA Corps. And during that audit, it was flagged that having the MSAs, the member service agreements, signed prior to the student's start, like official AmeriCorps enrollment start date, was actually a problem. And that we were told at that time, based on our understanding, it needed to be either the same day or after they were enrolled. And so I just wanted to confirm, because I think I heard the opposite today, and I apologize if I misinterpreted what you were saying, but it sounded like today you all were saying member service agreements should be signed the day they're enrolled or before. And so I was just confused which one we do.
Yeah, I don't know if Cooley or anybody who was associated with that audit is on the call and wants to speak to that finding, but my understanding is that it should be signed on or before, because this is an explanation of their expectations. So I don't know why you would tell them after they've already enrolled what they're.
And that's what we were doing, and that's why we were really surprised that they were like, no, because you had them sign before, you actually have to have them re-sign it.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me on its face. I mean, maybe there's something I'm not.
Yeah, Lena, we can follow up on that. I think that particular issue, because that is, I would agree with Michael. So, yeah, we can follow up on that.
That could be a misreading of a reg somewhere. I'm not sure what happened there.
Hey, Alana, Cody. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you
go ahead, Eric? Yeah, I don't know who had their hand up next.
I think it was. Yeah.
Oh, I just want to follow up with Alina's questions about the educational award. I had a member that reached out to me last week because her educational award is still pending institution action. She had reached out to me before. I told her to call the hotline, and now she is still with the same issue. Do we have a timeline that we can inform them, or? I'm planning to send this to Anthony anyways, but we had the training, so I figured I could just ask. So how we can support, because as what Alina said, I can't see anything with the educational award. So I already told her call the hotline. She said she did, and it's still pending institutional action.
It might depend on which institution, because it's my understanding, and we don't manage the Ed Awards either, so we're a little bit in the dark as well. But my understanding is that the member will basically try to apply the Ed Award to an institution, a university or college, et cetera. So then the portal deals with the university. They kind of deal together. So I'm not sure which institution where it might be pending. If it's at a school, then they'd have to just contact that school and kind of nudge them to, do whatever they need to do to apply that Ed Award. But the hotline's a good place to start, but also, again, the commission, and we'll dig into it and try to see what's going on there.
Okay, I'll email Anthony and I'll ask her for details, because she said that her school has not received any communication from AmeriCorps, because she's trying to, to help with that.
So it could be on their end. We'd have to look at the specific case, and it could be related to, obviously AmeriCorps has experienced a lot of turmoil this year, and there's been delays at the hotline, et cetera. So maybe it's related to that. But Yeah, I'm a broken
Okay.
record, but just contact your committee, your commission program administrator,
Yeah.
and especially when it's these kind of
Okay.
like, anomalies and you're not really exactly sure. You can't just look at a reg and say this is the answer. Call us and we'll try to dig into it.
But do we have any timeline that we can put in our documentation that they can expect, or now it's just it is what it is?
I've never seen a specific timeline. I don't know if anybody else has ever seen one, but no, I don't I don't have a specific timeline, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay, that's good. I'll reach out to Anthony and then maybe he can help us. Thank you.
Sure you can.
Hi,
And,
Michael. It's
Good. Go ahead, Sean.
okay. It's Sean Fudge from Rochester, New York, city of Rochester. I'm just getting started with this. I'm like way behind everybody on this call, and I'm feeling a little overwhelmed at the moment. So, is there something you can send to me that I can read to kind of catch up, or some back videos or something that can help me
Sure.
understand all the technologies and the things you all are saying, because I work in workforce development, but never AmeriCorps. So this is a new um, piece to my puzzle.
Sean, I can
sure.
send you an email of where you can find our I'm sorry, Michael, what were you gonna say?
Well, I'm going to drop in the chat. I'll drop a link to our program resources page, which
Okay.
is where you'll find our program handbook. Is probably a good place to start.
Okay.
But I would also recommend, once you're familiar with who your administrator is at the commission, set up a one-on-one, and you can kind of go through a list of questions or concerns that you have, and you can start addressing those with your administrator.
Okay. And I think once I get this and read it, I'll know what questions I have.
Sure. Yep.
Thank you.
No problem. Anything else on member supervision and support, member management? And then again, I must have said it 10 times by now, but if you have questions later on, feel free to contact us. That's what we're here for. Again, I don't want to overpromise. We might not always have the answer right away, but we will do our best to get you an answer as soon as possible and make sure that your program runs as smooth as possible. If there are no other questions, I'll pass it back to Eric. Thank you all for your attention.
Does anyone have any other questions for Michael at this time? It was a very informative presentation. Thank you very much for that, Michael. All right. I think